Li Hejin looked up at the massive crystal towers of the Galactic Central Academy. The morning sunlight from the three suns made the buildings shine in different colors. She took a deep breath, holding her data tablet close to her chest. As the first human student from South Korea to attend the academy, she felt both excited and nervous. The transport pod zoomed overhead, carrying students of different alien species to their classes. Some had blue skin, others had scales, and a few even floated instead of walking. Hejin touched her academy badge to make sure it was still there. The small silver pin was her key to everything in this new world. All new students, please gather at the central hall, a calm voice announced in multiple languages. Hejin watched as about 50 other new students moved toward the large glass building in the middle of the campus. She was the only human in the group. Inside the central hall, the air was cool and smelled like fresh flowers. The walls changed colors slowly, showing different star systems and galaxies. Hejin found an empty seat in the third row, next to a tall student with silvery skin who gave her a polite nod. Professor Dokmai, their main instructor, walked onto the stage. She looked almost human, except for her pure white eyes and the small antennae on her forehead that moved as she spoke. "Welcome to the most prestigious learning institution in the known galaxy," she said, her voice clear and strong. Hejin listened carefully as the professor explained their classes. They would study advanced mathematics, quantum physics, and galactic engineering. When Professor Dokmai showed examples of their first assignments on the large screen, Hejin's heart beat faster. The mathematical symbols were different from anything she had seen on Earth. During the break, Hejin tried to make sense of her class schedule on her data tablet. A shadow fell over her screen, and she looked up to see Kim Do-yeon, a top student from another alien world who happened to have Korean ancestors. His green eyes seemed to glow as he looked at her schedule. "You're in all the advanced classes," Do-yeon said, his voice showing surprise. "Are you sure you can handle them? Humans usually start with basic courses." Hejin straightened her back. "I was the best student at my school on Earth," she said quietly but firmly. "I understand numbers very well." Do-yeon raised an eyebrow. "We'll see. The academy isn't like your Earth schools. Don't feel bad when you need to switch to easier classes." He walked away, his silver uniform shining under the lights. Later that day, Hejin sat in her small room in the student housing tower. She looked out her window at the beautiful alien city spreading out below the academy. The lights from millions of buildings made patterns that reminded her of computer circuits. She turned on her personal computer and opened a new document. Instead of using the strange alien numbers, she started writing in the language she knew best, binary code, 1 and 0, the basic language of all computers. As she worked on her first assignment, she smiled. The aliens might have fancy symbols, but sometimes the simplest solution was the best one. That night, as the 3 moons rose in the sky, Hejin felt more confident. Yes, she was the only human in her class. Yes, the other students thought she wouldn't succeed. But she had a secret weapon they didn't understand yet. In her mind, everything was already turning into beautiful patterns of 1s and 0s. Tomorrow would be her first real class, and she was ready to prove that humans belonged at the Galactic Central Academy, even if she had to do it in her own way. The Advanced Computational Theory classroom was different from anything Hejin had seen before. Instead of chairs and desks, students sat at floating platforms that moved up or down based on their performance during class. Professor Dokmai stood at the center, surrounded by holographic displays showing complex mathematical problems. "Today we will solve quantum probability equations," Professor Dokmai announced. Her white eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on Hejin. "These equations are essential for calculating safe paths through wormholes." The first problem appeared in the air above them. Hejin watched as other students quickly began working on their data tablets. Their fingers moved fast, using the standard galactic mathematical symbols. Do-yeon's platform rose higher as he solved each part correctly. Hejin looked at her tablet. The alien symbols seemed to dance and blur together, but when she closed her eyes, she could see the problem differently. In her mind, everything became strings of ones and zeros. She started typing, converting each part of the equation into binary code. Professor Dokmai walked between the platforms, checking students' work. When she reached Hejin's station, she stopped. Her antennae twitched in confusion. "Miss Lee, what exactly are you doing?" "Solving the problem, Professor," Hejin replied quietly, still typing. "This is not solving. These are just two numbers repeated over and over." Professor Dokmai's voice grew louder, making other students turn to look. "This is not a simple counting exercise. This is advanced mathematics." Hejin's face felt hot, but she kept working. She knew she was right. The binary code was speaking to her, showing her the patterns in the quantum equations that others might miss. Du Yun smirked from his high platform. "Perhaps humans aren't ready for quantum mathematics," he said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Several students laughed. Professor Dokmai moved back to the center of the room. "Let's see everyone's solutions." Different answers appeared on the main display. Du Yun's solution was complex and elegant in the galactic style. Other students had similar approaches. Hejin's screen showed only lines of ones and zeros. "Miss Lee," Professor Dokmai said, her voice stern, "if you cannot work with proper mathematical notation, perhaps you should consider transferring to a lower-level class." Hejin gripped the edges of her platform. "Professor, I can explain my solution." She started, but Professor Dokmai had already moved on to the next problem. As the class continued, Hejin's platform stayed at its lowest level, but she didn't stop working. With each problem, she converted everything to binary, finding patterns that felt natural to her human mind. She filled page after page with her calculations. At the end of class, Park Jae-ho, a quiet student who sat near Hejin, looked at her screen with curiosity. "Your numbers," he whispered. "They're not random, are they?" Before Hejin could answer, Professor Dokmai called her to stay after class. As other students left, Du Yun passed by Hejin's platform. "Don't worry," he said with fake kindness. "Not everyone is meant for advanced studies. The basic mathematics class is actually quite good for beginners." Alone with Professor Dokmai, Hejin stood straight and tried to stay calm. The professor's white eyes studied her carefully. "Miss Lee, your approach to mathematics is..." Professor Dokmai paused, her antennae moving slowly. "Unconventional. If you cannot adapt to our methods, you will not succeed here. I expect to see proper galactic notation in tomorrow's exam, or we will have to discuss your future at the academy." Hejin nodded politely, but inside her mind, the binary code kept flowing. She knew there was only one way forward. She would take the exam, but she would do it her way. The way that made sense to her human brain. The way that showed how humans really think. The day of the midterm exam arrived at the Galactic Central Academy. Hejin walked into the examination hall early, carrying only her data tablet. The room was large and circular, with examination pods arranged in rings. Each pod would display a student's work on screens visible to everyone, making the exam both a test and a public demonstration. Professor Dokmai stood in the center of the room as students entered. Her white eyes watched each student take their places. When Hejin walked to her assigned pod, the professor's antennae twitched slightly, showing her disapproval. "Today's examination will test your understanding of advanced quantum calculations," Professor Dokmai announced. "Your results will determine if you continue in this advanced class. Begin." The examination pods activated, surrounding each student with holographic displays. The first question appeared. A complex problem about calculating quantum jumps between galaxies. Hejin read it carefully, then started typing in binary code. In the pod next to her, Du Yun worked quickly with standard galactic mathematics. His hands moved smoothly across his screen as he solved each problem. Other students followed similar methods, their screens filling with elegant alien formulas. Hajin remained focused on her work. She converted each problem into long strings of ones and zeros. In her mind, the binary code revealed hidden patterns in the quantum calculations. She worked steadily, solving problem after problem in her unique way. Halfway through the exam, Professor Dokmai began walking between the pods, examining each student's work. She nodded approvingly at most screens. Then she reached Hejin's pod. "Stop," Professor Dokmai commanded, her voice echoing through the hall. All students looked up from their work. Everyone observed this screen. With a wave of her hand, Professor Dokmai projected Hejin's work onto the main display in the center of the room. Lines of binary code filled the giant screen. "Miss Lee," Professor Dokmai said, "explain this." Hejin stood up straight in her pod. Her heart was beating fast, but her voice remained steady. "These are my solutions, Professor." "Solutions?" Professor Dokmai's antennae moved rapidly. "This is not mathematics. This is not even basic calculation. This appears to be random numbers." Du Yun raised his hand. "Professor, perhaps this demonstrates that humans are not yet prepared for advanced galactic education." Several students nodded in agreement. Others whispered among themselves. Hejin felt her face grow warm, but she didn't look down. "Miss Lee," Professor Dokmai continued, "I warned you about using proper mathematical notation. Yet you chose to fill your exam with this primitive code." "It's not primitive," Hejin said quietly but firmly. "It's binary code. It's the foundation of all human computing." "Computing." Professor Dokmai laughed softly. "This is not a computer programming class. This is advanced quantum mathematics." The professor turned to address the entire class. "Let this be a lesson to all. The Galactic Central Academy maintains the highest standards. We cannot accept work that fails to meet these standards, regardless of the species of origin." Hejin's hands tightened into fists at her sides. She looked at her screen, still filling with binary code. She knew she was right. Each line of ones and zeros represented precise mathematical calculations. But how could she prove it? Just then, she noticed Park Ji-ho staring intently at her screen. His eyes moved back and forth, following the patterns in her code. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing or whispering. He was actually reading her work. The exam period was almost over. Professor Dokmai returned to the center of the room, leaving Hejin's work still displayed on the main screen. "Complete your calculations," she announced. "Though some of us," she glanced at Hejin, "have already demonstrated their limitations." Hejin took a deep breath and returned to her work. She would finish this exam her way. The binary code flowed from her fingers as she completed the final problems, knowing that tomorrow would bring either her greatest triumph or her greatest failure at the academy. After the exam, Hejin sat alone in the academy's garden, watching the three suns set behind the crystal towers. Her data tablet lay beside her, still showing her binary code solutions. The events of the day played over and over in her mind. A shadow fell across her tablet. She looked up to see Park Ji-ho standing there, his expression thoughtful. Unlike the other students who had laughed at her, Ji-ho seemed genuinely interested. "May I sit?" he asked politely. When Hejin nodded, he settled beside her on the floating garden bench. He picked up her tablet and studied the screen carefully. "I noticed something during the exam," Ji-ho said slowly. "Your code, it follows a pattern. At first, I thought it was random, like everyone else. But then I saw it." Hejin sat up straighter. "You can read binary code." Ji-ho shook his head. "Not exactly. But I study ancient number systems from different worlds. And this." He pointed to a section of her work. "This reminds me of something I saw in old Earth documents about early computers." He pulled out his own tablet and opened several files. "Look at this," he said, showing her images of early Earth computer systems. "Your solutions match the basic structure of computer processing, but you've adapted it for quantum calculations." Hejin felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone understood. She explained how she converted the quantum problems into binary, showing him how each line of code represented a complex mathematical operation. Jaiho's eyes widened as he followed her explanation. "This is remarkable," he said. "You're not just solving the problems, you're processing them the way a quantum computer would." He began typing rapidly on his tablet, converting one of her binary solutions back into standard galactic mathematics. As the numbers appeared on his screen, he gasped. "He-Jin," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "Your answers are not only correct, they're more efficient than the standard solutions. You found patterns that our traditional methods missed." They spent the next hour analyzing her work. Ji-Ho helped her translate several more solutions, revealing how her binary approach had uncovered new ways of solving quantum equations. "We need to show this to Professor Dokmi," Ji-Ho said firmly. "But first, we should prepare a proper presentation. Something that clearly shows how your method works." He-Jin hesitated. "Do you think she'll listen? She seemed certain that my work was worthless." Ji-Ho smiled. "Professor Dokmi values truth above all else. If we can prove your method is valid, she will have to accept it. Besides," he added, "I've never seen anyone solve quantum probability loops as quickly as you did in binary." They worked together as the moons rose in the sky, preparing their presentation. Ji-Ho helped translate her binary code into forms other students could understand, while He-Jin explained the logic behind her calculations. "There's something else," Ji-Ho said as they finished. "Your method might be important beyond just passing an exam. If binary code can simplify quantum calculations this way, it could change how we approach space travel calculations." He-Jin looked at their work, feeling the new sense of confidence. She wasn't just proving herself anymore. She was showing how human thinking could contribute to galactic science. As they packed up their tablets, Ji-Ho turned to her. "Tomorrow morning, before class, we'll show Professor Dokmi. Are you ready?" He-Jin nodded. The binary code had been her secret language, her way of understanding the universe. Now it was time to share it with everyone. Early the next morning, He-Jin and Ji-Ho stood outside Professor Dokmi's office. The corridor was quiet, with only the soft hum of the Academy's power systems in the background. He-Jin held her data tablet tightly, reviewing their presentation one final time. Professor Dokmi looked up from her desk as they entered. Her white eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of He-Jin. "Yes?" she asked, her antennae moving slowly. "Professor," Ji-Ho began respectfully, "we need to show you something important about He-Jin's exam solutions." The professor's expression remained stern. "I believe we concluded our discussion about Miss Lee's inappropriate use of primitive coding yesterday." "Please, Professor," Ji-Ho continued. "What if I told you that her binary solutions reveal a new approach to quantum calculations?" He activated his tablet, projecting their analysis into the air between them. Professor Dokmi watched as Ji-Ho displayed He-Jin's binary code alongside its translation into standard galactic mathematics. Her antennae began to move more rapidly as she studied the calculations. "This first equation," Ji-Ho explained, pointing to a particularly complex section. He-Jin's binary solution completed it in 12 steps. The standard method requires 23. He-Jin stepped forward. "Binary code is the foundation of human computing," she said quietly. "When I see quantum equations, my mind automatically converts them to ones and zeros. It helps me see patterns that might be hidden in standard notation." Professor Dokmi stood up and walked closer to the projection. She raised her hand, moving through the holographic numbers with growing interest. "Show me more," she said. For the next hour, they demonstrated how He-Jin's binary approach worked. They showed how her solutions to the exam questions were not only correct, but often found shorter paths to the answers. Here, He-Jin pointed to a particularly difficult problem about wormhole stability. In binary, you can see how the quantum fluctuations follow a pattern. It's like a rhythm in the code. Professor Dokmi was silent for a long moment. Her antennae had stopped moving completely, a sign of deep concentration. Finally, she turned to face the Jin. "Miss Lee," she said slowly, "I owe you an apology. I assumed your methods were primitive because they were different. I failed to see that you had discovered something valuable." She turned back to the projected calculations. "This binary approach, it could revolutionize how we calculate quantum space paths. The efficiency of your solutions could make interstellar travel safer and faster." Jin felt warmth spread through her chest. Not just relief, but pride. Her human way of thinking, which had seemed so out of place yesterday, was now recognized as something special. Professor Jaiho added, Jin's method might help other students too. Some might find binary code easier to understand than traditional notation. Professor Dokmei nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed. Miss Lee, would you be willing to present your method to the entire class? I believe we all have something to learn from this." "Yes, Professor," Jin replied, standing taller. "I would be happy to share." As they left the office, Professor Dokmei called after them. "Miss Lee, one more thing. Your exam results." She paused. "You received the highest score in the class. Your binary solutions were perfect." Walking down the corridor with Jaiho, Jin felt as if she were floating. Her binary code, the language that had always made sense to her, had proven its worth. She had shown that human methods deserved respect in the galaxy. "Ready to show everyone else?" Jaiho asked with a smile. Jin nodded confidently. She was ready to share her gift with the stars. The main lecture hall was filled with students from all across the galaxy. Professor Dokmei stood at the center, addressing the gathered crowd. "Today, we will learn something valuable about different ways of thinking," she announced. "Miss Lee will demonstrate how human binary code can enhance our understanding of quantum mathematics." Jin walked to the front, her heart beating fast, but her steps steady. The large display screen behind her came to life, showing both binary code and standard galactic mathematics side by side. "Binary code is the language of Earth computers," Jin began, her voice clear and confident. "It uses only two numbers, 1 and 0. But with these simple numbers, we can express any mathematical concept." She showed them a basic quantum equation. On one side of the screen, she solved it using traditional methods. On the other side, she converted it to binary code. The students watched in silence as she worked. "Notice how the binary solution finds patterns," she explained. "Each 1 and 0 represents a quantum state. When we line them up this way, we can see connections that might be hidden in standard notation." Du Yun, who had been watching with growing interest, raised his hand. "But how do you know which patterns matter?" he asked, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. Jin smiled. "Human brains are like computers in some ways. We naturally look for patterns in everything we see. Binary code helps us organize these patterns in a way that makes sense to us." Professor Dokmei stepped forward. "This is why diversity in the galaxy is so important," she added. "Each species brings their own way of understanding the universe. What seems strange to one might be brilliant to another." Jin demonstrated more complex problems, showing how binary code could simplify difficult calculations. Students began taking notes, some even trying to convert simple equations into 1s and 0s themselves. "The beauty of binary," Jin continued, "is that it breaks everything down to its simplest form. Either something is, or it isn't, 1 or 0. This helps us understand quantum states more clearly." A student from the back called out, "But isn't it more work to convert everything to binary first?" "For me, it's natural," Jin explained. "Just like you naturally think in galactic standard notation, I think in binary. Different minds work in different ways." Professor Dokmei nodded approvingly. "This is precisely why the Academy exists. Not to force everyone to think the same way, but to learn from each other's unique perspectives." As the presentation continued, Jin noticed something remarkable. The students who had laughed at her binary code yesterday were now eagerly trying to understand it. Even Du Yun was carefully converting small problems into binary, his face showing concentration and respect. Understanding binary code, He Jin concluded, isn't just about mathematics. It's about seeing that there are many paths to knowledge. Humans might be new to galactic society, but we bring our own wisdom to share. After the presentation, students gathered around He Jin, asking questions and sharing their own experiences with different mathematical systems. Professor Dokmai watched with satisfaction as species barriers broke down in the pursuit of understanding. Miss Lee, the professor said quietly, "You have taught us all something valuable today. Sometimes, the greatest discoveries come from embracing different ways of thinking." He Jin looked around at her fellow students, now eagerly exploring binary code together. She had done more than prove herself. She had helped build a bridge between human and alien minds, one simple pattern of ones and zeros at a time. The news about He Jin's binary method spread quickly through the Galactic Central Academy. Students from different departments began showing up at her quantum mathematics class to learn more. Professor Dokmai had to move their sessions to a larger lecture hall to accommodate all the interested learners. On this particular morning, He Jin found herself surrounded by a diverse group of students. She had set up a special study group to teach binary code while learning traditional galactic mathematics from her classmates. "Today we'll practice converting quantum calculations both ways," He Jin said to the group. "This will help us understand how different mathematical languages can describe the same thing." Du Yun, who had become one of her most dedicated students, sat in the front row. His initial skepticism had transformed into genuine respect. "I've been using binary code for simple calculations," he shared with the group. "It helps me see patterns I missed before." The study session was unlike any other at the academy. Students worked together, comparing their different ways of solving problems. Some used binary code, others used traditional methods, and many tried combining both approaches. "Look at this," said a student from the engineering department. "If we use binary code for the initial calculation and then convert it to standard notation, we can solve quantum engine problems much faster." He Jin walked around the room, helping students who struggled with the conversion process. She noticed how each species approached binary code differently. Some saw it as music, others as a dance of numbers. Each perspective added something new to their understanding. Professor Dokmai often stopped by to observe these sessions. Today, she watched with particular interest as students from 12 different worlds worked together, sharing their insights and discoveries. "Miss Lee," she called out, "the Academy Board is very interested in your binary method. They want to include it in next year's curriculum." The students looked up with excitement. He Jin felt a warm glow of pride. Her human way of thinking, once dismissed as primitive, would now be taught alongside traditional galactic mathematics. "But there's more," Professor Dokmai continued. "Several space transport companies have contacted us. They believe your binary approach to quantum calculations could make their navigation systems more efficient." The room buzzed with conversation. Students began discussing how binary code could be applied to their own fields of study. A group of engineering students talked about using it for spacecraft design. Medical students wondered if it could help with genetic calculations. "We should create a database," Du Yun suggested, showing how binary code can be used in different fields. Everyone could contribute their discoveries. He Jin smiled at how far things had come. Just weeks ago, she had been the strange human who wrote in ones and zeros. Now she was helping to bridge the gap between human and alien scientific knowledge. As the study session ended, Professor Dokmai pulled He Jin aside. "You've started something remarkable here," she said. "This is more than just teaching mathematics. You're showing us how much we can learn from each other when we keep our minds open." Looking around at her fellow students, still deeply engaged in discussion, He Jin realized that binary code had become more than just a way to solve problems. It had become a symbol of how different species could work together, each bringing their unique gifts to create something greater than they could achieve alone. The three suns were setting outside, casting rainbow shadows through the crystal towers of the academy. Inside, the future of galactic education was being shaped, one binary digit at a time. 1 year had passed since Ho-Jin first introduced binary code to the Galactic Central Academy. The main auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and representatives from various space organizations. They had gathered for the Academy's annual curriculum announcement. The Academy's director stood at the center stage, his crystalline form catching the morning light. "Today marks a significant change in our educational approach," he announced. "For the first time in our history, we are officially incorporating human mathematical methods into our standard curriculum." He-Jin sat in the front row beside Professor Doc May, watching as the new educational program was unveiled. The display screen showed the combined teaching method they had developed, where traditional galactic mathematics worked alongside binary code. "Thanks to Miss Lee's discovery," the director continued, "our understanding of quantum mathematics has advanced significantly. Space travel calculations are now 30% more efficient when using the combined approach." Professor Doc Mai stood up to present the results of their year-long study. "We have found that students learn more effectively when exposed to multiple mathematical languages," she explained. "The binary method helps some understand concepts they previously struggled with." Du Yun, now one of the Academy's top researchers, stepped forward to share his findings. "By combining human binary thinking with traditional galactic mathematics, we have developed new ways to calculate quantum probabilities. This has already improved the safety of interstellar travel." The audience watched as he demonstrated a new navigation system that used both mathematical approaches. The system could plot safer paths through space, reducing travel time while increasing security. "But perhaps the most valuable lesson," Professor Doc May added, "is not about mathematics at all. It is about the importance of embracing different ways of thinking." He-Jin looked around the auditorium. Students from dozens of worlds sat together, many taking notes using both binary code and traditional notation. What had started as her personal solution had grown into something much larger. The director announced the next phase of the program. "Starting next term, we will welcome more human students to the Academy. Each species brings unique perspectives that enhance our understanding of the universe." After the presentation, Ho-Jin found herself surrounded by young students seeking advice. "How did you find the courage to keep using binary code when everyone doubted you?" a new human student asked. "I believed in what made sense to me," Ho-Jin replied. "Sometimes the best solutions come from staying true to your own way of thinking while remaining open to learning from others." Professor Doc Mee joined them, her white eyes showing warmth. "Miss Lee will be teaching advanced quantum computation next term," she announced. "Her class will be the first to officially teach both mathematical systems together." As the crowd dispersed, Ho-Jin walked to her favorite spot in the Academy gardens. The three suns were setting, creating beautiful patterns across the crystal towers. She opened her data tablet, looking at the familiar strings of ones and zeros that had changed her life. Park Ji-ho found her there. "The space transport companies want to expand the binary navigation system to all major routes," he reported excitedly. "Your method is becoming the new standard." He-Jin smiled, remembering her first difficult days at the Academy. What had seemed like a weakness had become a bridge between worlds, proof that every species had something valuable to contribute to galactic knowledge. As the moons rose in the darkening sky, Ho-Jin felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had done more than prove herself. She had helped create a future where different ways of thinking were not just accepted but celebrated. The binary code that once made her feel like an outsider had become a symbol of unity in the vast expanse of space.